Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. Thanks so much for joining me again today. I am excited because today my guest is Dr. Joe Dilley. He's a licensed clinical psychologist who provides psychotherapy and psychological assessment to individuals of any age. He is particularly passionate about helping individuals impacted by ADHD and anxiety. Dr. Joe Dilley is here with us to talk about how to identify when kids might be dependent on their electronics and how to break the electronics addiction. He's going to tell us why we need to look at the reasons and the motivations behind our children using electronics. I am so thrilled that he's here today. I love his book, The Game is Playing Your Kid, How to Unplug and Reconnect in the Digital Age, and I highly recommend it. I'm thrilled. I'm excited. This is going to be a great conversation, and I can't wait for you to join us. Let's go.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by ChildNEXUS.
Dr. Dilley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. Really appreciate being here and looking forward to it.
I'm so glad you're here. When I reached out to you, I said that you wrote some articles for us pre-pandemic about how to manage tech use. And I said, I have to follow up with him to see what has changed since the pandemic, because you wrote your book before the pandemic. And I'm assuming there's been significant increases in tech use. We've all seen it. I know I saw it in my home during the pandemic. Has the pandemic changed your perspective on digital use?
Well, yes, of course. And then also it has reified the perspective that I had. So yeah, we all experienced it where our children and ourselves and our partners had to rely even more on digital modes of communication and even belonging and hanging out. We got to know my son's entire kindergarten parent cohort over Zoom, and we didn't meet them until late in the school year. And so, yes, it provided an unexpected and rather unwelcomed boost to everybody's digital time spent. However, it really reified that the kind of core principles for managing screen time for our kids and for ourselves are exactly as they were before the pandemic. It just became more challenging to do it.
Right. And I completely agree with you, because I think that there's already overuse of technology in homes. And that's part of, probably what led to your book. But then I think parents to a certain degree thought there's nothing that I can do during this situation because,
right.
I have to work from home and I can't entertain my children, particularly the younger children, for a full day. And they had to be on screens for school. And it seems like the lockdowns exacerbated an already intense overuse of technology in homes.
Perfectly put. Exactly.
And so what is the fallout for that? Because I know that you said that kind of confirmed what you already had thought about. I know that there's been a lot of conversations, a lot of research on the mental health fallout from excessive use of media. I'd love for you to talk about that, because I think parents would like to kind of rein in the technology use. And I think it's important to first understand what is the impact on children and adolescents.
You bet. Well, in my clinical practice, the impact is quite apparent. And then the actual quantification of that impact is going to come out here over time, especially in longitudinal studies. But it's so far exactly as we would expect. It's sort of the pandemic induced the very symptoms of depression that you screen for when you're determining if your patient is depressed. So withdrawal, isolation, changes in sleep and eating habits that are not typically for the better. And it really shook everybody up. I had a few clients who follow me on this. I ended up more worried about because they were faring so well during the early days of the pandemic. Hey, I can just kind of sleep all the way up until right when class starts and then throw on a sweatshirt. And then, on my breaks and after the school day, I just game and game and game. And I kind of love it. And those were the situations that I felt really the most concerned about. And fortunately, those clients who were of that mindset or had that experience actually shifted out of it. And they did sealing out. They became bored. They wanted in-person contact with their friends. And now they've returned to a more, balanced inside and outside kind of approach. So there was the depression or the mood impact big time. Anxiety. So anxiety has a complex relationship with isolation. On the one hand, if we can kind of be surrounded by our familiar bedroom or kitchen or home office or something like that, that can certainly help as we engage with people online. But the question is going to be, so what does this do to kids and adults who are cultivating those social skills and habits, and to have that development interrupted to the tune of about 1.5 to 2 years? What I've seen personally and clinically is, kids are resilient, they're bouncing back, they're able to go and re-engage with one another and with adults. But it's not quite the same as it would have been had they followed their, expected developmental trajectory in social settings. And so we want to watch for signs of anxiety or social apprehension. And again, kind of back to the depression side, signs of isolation, withdrawal, that kind of thing.
Right. And I think that's so important to watch kids over time. And like, I think you said initially that I don't think we yet know what the long-term impact is going to be. We're going to have to kind of wait for those longitudinal studies, but we're already seeing that there is an impact. You talked about depression, you talked about anxiety, and even pre-pandemic, there was an epidemic of loneliness, even with social media use.
Right.
And we know the connection between loneliness and depression.
Yes. Well, and we are scratching the surface of kind of the mental health effects. Then we haven't yet mentioned the academic side of things. Learning to read on a virtual platform was no easy task in our home. And I know for a lot of my clients as well. And so, what's going to be the ripple effect down the line academically for students at every grade level? And again, there are those students who responded really well academically, just like some of them initially did kind of on the psychological side, or at least in terms of their initial mood and impressions of the new pace. So we don't want to forget those exceptions, but generally speaking, this was such an unexpected shift that the learning really took a hit.
Right. And I'm glad that you mentioned that academic piece, particularly the kids who were learning to read during the pandemic and had to do that remotely, because we know that, in general, 1 in 5 students is going to struggle with some neurodevelopmental disorder, including dyslexia. And, I've talked to other clinicians and practitioners who worry that those kids who are predisposed to develop dyslexia, for example, anyway, are going to get missed because they're going to attribute the difficulties with reading to the pandemic.
Yes. Right. It's really a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, those kids are going to get missed, or the causality is going to be misattributed. And then on the other hand, I know in all my colleagues' practices, and certainly in mine as well, we saw this huge surge of awareness about what our kids were actually dealing with academically. And so I don't think I've ever performed so much neuropsych assessment as during the pandemic, albeit somewhat remotely or behind masks and at a distance and so forth. But point being, there was such a surge of interest in, oh, what's going on for my son or daughter? Because I'm seeing now firsthand what they've kind of been trying to describe over the years about their school difficulties.
Absolutely. I completely agree, because I think that for the first time, parents had a front seat to their kids' learning. They're not in the classroom, but they had the front seat to their kids' learning. And for many parents, they had a front seat to their kids struggling for the first time. And like you're saying, they got to see it. They got to see where the struggle was.
Yeah.
And that led them to seek out the help and increase their own understanding of what was happening.
Right. Some blessings in disguise, some silver linings, to be sure.
Absolutely. Now, we talked about kids who may have some neurodevelopmental issues. You talked about doing a lot of neuropsych assessments during this time. I saw that in my practice as well, and particularly leading up to this summer. A lot of people wanting to better understand the struggles their kids are facing and knowing how to support them. Do you think that students who think and learn differently, who may have a neurodevelopmental disorder like dyslexia, like ADHD, have a unique relationship with screen time? Are there unique risk factors for them? And of course, it's going to be different depending on their profile.
Such a deep question. And I think the answer is yes, because by definition, students with those differences are encountering things like difficulty with response inhibition. So same kind of thing as if they're presented with other temptations or potentially negative habits if they're excessively engaged in them. Screen time certainly presents those risk factors, those challenges. So if we have a student, let's say on the autism spectrum, who's having trouble reading social cues and might say something and it escapes their filter, perhaps they weren't aware that it was going to come off as, inadvertently offensive or something like that. Now we multiply that because now it exists in cyberspace in perpetuity, like if it's on a social media feed or something. Now it's being viewed and kind of sent around by multiple people. And so that becomes a huge challenge, especially relative to what would happen if they made just kind of an offhand comment to a friend on the playground, and only that one friend heard it and maybe was able to give them some feedback and kind of get things redirected. And so, yes, I think that screen time certainly presents heightened challenges for students with neurodevelopmental differences, but so too would any other kind of temptation or potentially risky endeavor.
Absolutely. And I've also seen, kids who struggle often want to engage in activities that, make them feel better about themselves, because school is such a struggle, right? It has a negative impact on their self-esteem, their self-concept. And when they're engaging in these screen activities, whether it be gaming or television, it's an escape from their struggle.
Yes. And that's I'm so glad that you mentioned the word escape, because of a couple of factors that we'll run through, a couple of motives, let's say, that we'll run through momentarily, I would imagine. Escapism is one of those risk factors that lets us know that the gaming or social media use might be becoming problematic. It's not so much escape like you might escape if you want to watch Obi-Wan Kenobi or Mandalorian or something kind of fun fantasy as a family. This would be more like escaping the realities of everyday life and the responsibilities therein. So we want to look at that, and then I'll just mention them briefly. Amount of time and content would be the other two variables to really pay attention to as you're determining, does my kid have, or my partner or myself have a kind of a screen time dependence issue? We want to look at escapism from responsibility and reality, time and content.
Well, that's really important. I love that you mentioned that, because that really gets to the reason why, individuals use screens and may even use them excessively. And
one of those reasons is escapism. So when we're thinking about problematic screen time use, you mentioned some of the things to look for. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that. If parents, because I see parents all the time who come in for assessments and say, I think my kids are spending too much time on screens. And there may be a lot of parents listening who are thinking that. How do you know when it's too much? What are some of those signs or red flags that let you know that this is too much?
Sure. So first thing I try to do is reassure parents, trust your gut. You're uniquely equipped to guide this child or these children by virtue of being their parent. And so same thing that you would do if you thought, is my child's nutritional routine or sleep routine out of whack? So we want to look at, when it comes to gaming and social media use, what's the content that's being transmitted? Is it violent? Is it socially aggressive? Is it negative in any of those ways? How much time are they spending on it? Is it excessive? And that's where we go, well, what constitutes excessive? Well, then we get that mediating variable of content, because what if it's educational in nature, like when we were all doing distance learning? And so, but you'll know if it's excessive time-wise, because I call it like the zombie effect, where, your kid gets off the screen and they're slow to respond and kind of, they've got that glazed over look. And by the way, every time I say kid, you can insert self and partner here too. It happens to adults too. You'll know that it's excessive if their sleep patterns are interrupted and the onset of their sleep is delayed, if the quality of their sleep is impacted. And of course, and we'll get to this, I'm sure, kids are going to push back. Oh, no, I didn't sleep poorly because of gaming right before bed.
Right.
It must have been, it must have been those vegetables you made me eat. And so that's, again, you're kind of just trusting your gut and you're looking at context. So, I think the time is out of whack. Yeah. And I didn't love the content of what they were just playing. And then also, do they bounce back and return to reality, again, in terms of responsibility and kind of attunement, presence, mindful presence in the moment? Can they get off the screen and resume, tasks around the house, a conversation at dinner? Or are they like completely preoccupied with getting back on the screen and all they talk about is the game? Or their mood is understandably thrown off by, a social media exchange? Those impacts are certainly valid and understandable, but it's our job to go, so each time you get off Insta, you feel lousy. Let me help you think about, a different way of engaging with your friends. Well, there's Snapchat. Well, same kind of thing. It seems to be leaving you sideways instead of kind of rebalanced.
And, you mentioned gaming and you mentioned, Instagram, and that makes me think about the different types of screen time. You talked about content and that, there've been studies and parents ask this question all the time, is all screen created equal? There's television and then there's gaming and then there's internet use and social media. And there seems to be some nuances there. And there's new research coming out, particularly with its impact on girls in internet and social media. Right.
We know that we see higher rates of cyberbullying among females. And so we really have to watch for that. And we have to watch for that in boys as well. So when we think about whether all screen time is created equal, it's helpful to parse it out into kind of the physiological and psychological effects. So physiologically speaking, whether we're watching a show or playing a game, there's little difference in the impact on, say, eyesight. And so my ophthalmologist was saying that she's seeing higher rates of myopia in children because of excessive screen use. And that was pre-pandemic. And so when we engage with, say, educational content, but it's screen-based, we need to be thinking about the physiological impact on the eyes. And I'm certainly no expert, but on other physiological processes like sleep. And then we can kind of transition over. It's not a sharp dichotomy. it's rather a gradient, we can get over into psychological impact. And so kind of back to this idea of how do we know when it's too much? Yeah, some of it does depend on the content, because like right after this, I'm going to be hopping on some virtual sessions, therapy sessions. Now, I'm not going to cut those short just because, I'm going to be on the screen too much today or something like that. Just like I hope NASA and SpaceX keep their feeds going when they're managing, an outer space launch. We don't want them to cut the cord, so to speak. So content matters. But again, what I love to encourage families to do is let's look at the context. So then what happens after? Psychologically, what happens after? Can my kid, my partner, myself return to everyday real life and exercise and eat normally and carry on a conversation and go out and meet people and give that hearty handshake with eye contact? Or has whatever they've been doing impacted those basic functions? And can they do all of this with a reasonably cheerful disposition? Or are they becoming depressed and anxious and so forth?
Right. And so it's complex. What you've described is a really complex relationship with media. It's content. It's the amount of time, we are all spending in front of screens. It's the reason why we're on the screens. Is it escapism, like you were saying? And then you're saying also for parents, it's particularly important to pay attention to how their children are behaving when the screen is no longer in front of them.
Right. You bet. There's some research that indicates that even rather excessive gaming, if it's done in a socially supportive way, and if it's like as a team, can mitigate symptoms of depression. And I thought, now what in the world is going on with that? And then I thought, oh, right. Socially supportive and as a team, that's kind of like when you're heavily involved in your volleyball season or your football season. You come home and go, man, I'm tired, but that was pretty exhilarating. And it looks like we're, faring well this season and I'm excited about tomorrow. That doesn't sound like a kid who's depressed. And so some of those same benefits can be gleaned from doing those kind of activities on screen, but we really have to watch it, because after about, say, 3 hours, and I'm not saying that should be everybody's upper or lower limit or anything, and we can talk about why we don't want to draw hard and fast rules if it's not already apparent. But after about 3 hours, quantifiably, let's say, the benefits of gaming diminish, if not disappear. Benefits like spatial perception, reasoning, attention, problem solving, that kind of stuff. And so we can actually see a kind of a rebound effect, if you will, where once you cross that threshold, those benefits aren't detectable anyway.
Right. Well, that speaks to, the limit you talked about. And parents ask this all the time. How much screen time should my child have? And I'm sure you have thoughts on this. It's going to obviously be different depending on the age of the child, the content. You talked about, playing video games as a group, as a team. That is going to be very different than, a young girl, for example, who's scrolling Instagram feeds for 2 hours.
Oh, very
right,
much
and a very
so.
passive experience. Right.
Oh, wow. Right. Man, so many thoughts all at once. Okay. So this is where it can help.
That was intentional.
No, I mean, so many are occurring to me because I got, images of that girl, and it made me think of one analogy. And then as you were forming the thought, I was thinking about, this other analogy, which would be how much screen time. Okay. Well, probably about the same number of hours as the number of potato chips that you offer your kid. Well, wait a minute, Dr. Joe, that really depends. Exactly. Right. Well, these aren't fried. These are baked. And also my kid is 15 and he just finished practice and he's really hungry. Okay. 12.
Right.
Okay, so it depends, but that's where we are equipped as parents to help our kids make wise choices about the length of time and, of course, about the content and so forth. Another thought would be, okay, fire is good in a fireplace because it's safe and contained and it provides warmth. It is not good when we see wildfires blazing, like seems to be happening all the time lately. It's also problematic if we give our kid, a book of matches and go, "Hey, head on up to your room. Don't burn anything down, but go ahead and flirt with it a little bit." That's essentially what we're doing when we send our kids up to their closed bedroom with a device that can connect with the entire world. We would never host a party, invite the entire world. The bouncer only needs to see if you like your son or daughter, and then the bouncer lets them in and up into their bedroom. We wouldn't do it. So what are we doing? And so that's where these kind of analogies to real life or surreal life, I guess, can really help us make those decisions with our kids. And the emphasis on the cooperation there is very intentional. I've actually had kids read my book and recommend it to their parents because it's fair. The approach is fair and it works. It's not stigmatizing. And I didn't make it up. It's been around for about 60 years. And we use it for all kinds of other things. It's basic structural family therapy and family systems theory that help guide our everyday interactions with our kids.
Right. And, I'm thinking about this transition we're making. We're recording this in August. A lot of students are transitioning back to school if they haven't already. And for parents who are thinking, I've just kind of let my kids do whatever they want over the summer to a certain extent. Yes, they've had too much time on screens, but, they've been working really hard over the academic year. There are a lot of disruptions. They may have had learning challenges and they need a break. Now, if parents now say, they're listening to this, they're like, okay, clearly they've spent too much time on screens. I want to rein it in. Now going back to school, it's a good opportunity to reset. What are some strategies that you recommend to families? We're going to recommend that they get your book, first of all. I'm going to recommend that. But for parents who might be listening, what are some strategies that you recommend might be helpful, particularly now?
You bet. And there are hypothetical scripts in the book that you can rely on as kind of references for this. But in broad brushstrokes, what we're trying to do is engage the child and what they want. And so we actually start by sort of going, hey, ball is actually in your court, at least to start this volley. So what are you looking for when you come home after practice and it's already 5:30? What do you have in mind? How would your ideal night look so that you get some screen time and some, downtime, but also so that homework gets done and you get into bed at a decent hour? What's your plan? And then we help shape that plan. And when they start to thumb their nose at the system and go, what? Get off my case, just like you have been off my case all summer. That's where we have to get, kind of creative or at least think outside the box a little bit, where we go, okay, what do you think I would need to see in order to know that you're managing your evening or your weekend and your morning, for that matter, like before school? And by the way, you just struggled with the first test of doing that because I was simply trying to engage you in a conversation of what you wanted, and you told me to pound sand. So how do you think that resonated with me? Not very well. Right. Okay, so let's try it again. What would your evening look like? And now they're engaged because they know, well, wait a second, I actually stand to gain more by participating in this conversation than if mom and dad or if both parents prima facie, shut it all down.
Right.
Then you'll obviously get the pushback a lot of times that says, they'll never shut it all down. All my homework has to be submitted online anyway.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. We saw that before the pandemic too, because plenty of things were submitted electronically then as well. And we do the same thing where, depending on the intensity of the use and the problem, we might decide, yep, tough. You're going to have to arrange with your teachers another way to submit assignments, or I will scan and submit your handwritten work, or, gee, none of those will work. I guess your grades are going to take a hit too. We really have to figure this out. And it's that third one that leaves parents going, what? What are you talking about? You got to be kidding me. But what's more important to you, that your kid gets into college or that they're able to stay there?
Right. That's so important. And I think it's important to recognize anyone who has kids, particularly the teenagers, is that this is not easy. It's not easy to just say, oh, we're going to do this today. We're going to, use these scripts, and then everything all of a sudden the next day will be magical. It takes time to get these systems in place.
It really does. And it's tough even for psychologists, including myself. Like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're dynamic beings and we're social creatures, and, things get in the way. Or as one of my professors in college used to say, life gets sloppy. Okay. Question is, do we have a core set of paradigms, principles, values that we can return to sort of right the ship and to get our tacking, back on track so that we're generally headed to the same destination?
Absolutely. And what you've described is really a collaborative approach, because I think, I know parents have a significant role in this as well, because parents will say it's easy. It's much easier for parents to just let the kids sit in front of the screen, particularly with the little ones, because they want to engage with their parents. My son yesterday was like, Mom, come outside and throw a football with me. And I had things to do, but I know that if I didn't do that, he'd probably pick up his iPad, right?
Totally.
It's easier, right? Or put on the television and watch a show. So I stopped what I was doing to go and play football and throw a football. But that was such a meaningful time to spend with him. And we're we're throwing the football back and forth. I'm horrible. And he was letting me know that I can't throw very well. But parents have to do that. They know there's going to take some sacrifice on parents' part as well.
Man, isn't it? Boy, same sort of thing with chess, teaching my son chess. The other day, I was thinking, I really have to finish this report. But my goodness, you're going to be in school in a couple days. And so I've got to seize this opportunity while I can.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it is difficult, and it is a process. And as you notice those little signs of kids, kind of going with the flow, following your lead, saying okay when it's time to turn off the screen, like those kind of unexpectedly smooth moments, I want us all to reinforce that like crazy. So, wait a second. You know what you just showed me? You just showed me that thing doesn't have total power over you at all. You were able to turn it off with no problem. What do you think that indicates for tomorrow? Probably we can be more flexible. I don't need to ask you quite as early, because if you're able to turn it off in 5 seconds, then I don't need to tell you 5 minutes early and anticipate a power struggle. You can just play all the way up until X o'clock.
Right. That is so true. And then they're getting some self-awareness from that feedback that you give them.
Nice. Right. And after all, that's what we want them to do, is internalize that realistic but supportive and positive voice that we have in their lives if we seize those opportunities, because then that's what they're going to hear internally. That's their inner monologue as they're trying to finish that test and it's really hard, or as they're trying to resist that social temptation and it's really difficult. But they hear us cheering them on, going, here's why what you're doing right now is a great idea. Well done. And it's going to pay off for you. And I'll see to it that that if the natural consequences don't pay off for you, that we can facilitate some.
Absolutely. I absolutely love that. That is so great. I can't believe this 30 minutes has just flown by.
Wow. Yes,
and it really has. And this is really good information, because I think parents are struggling with the screens. And we also know where there's a lot of concern about lower levels of physical activity because of the screens, which is a health issue. But I think that there are things that we can do. We can collaboratively work with our children, with our adolescents, to decrease screen time, have more meaningful time spent interacting in real life,
right.
With people, with family members, with friends, and modeling that behavior ourselves. Because like you said, it's not just the kids, it's the parents and the adults as well.
You bet. It really is. It takes a village.
It really does. I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation, a lot of great information for parents, reminders for ourselves in terms of our own technology use, and some good strategies as we get to as we think about transitioning back to school with some healthier habits.
Absolutely. Well, my pleasure. Thank you.
What is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you if they want to connect with you, learn more?
Sure. My practice website is synergypsych.com. And then my book website is don'tgetplayed.com. And there are ways of contacting and ordering and things like that. And then my email address, feel free to just fire off an email, Dr. Joe, DRJOE @synergypsych.com.
Great. And we will put that information in the show notes, and Dr. Dilley's book, The Game is Playing Your Kid. We're going to put a link to that book as well, so you can pick it up. It's a great resource for all parents to have. Thank you so much again for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Loved this conversation. And I hope you did too. Make sure you check out the show notes. There's a link to Dr. Dilley's book, The Game is Playing Your Kid, How to Unplug and Reconnect in the Digital Age. The book guides parents through 3 simple steps to breaking the electronics addiction, and I can't recommend it enough. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by ChildNEXUS. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.